Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm Mayor Greg Fischer of Louisville, and really appreciate you taking some time here this afternoon for our public safety update. So Chief Erika Shields and I will be kind of filling everybody in on a lot of the details that have been going on over the past couple of months. Obviously, in the summer of 2020, with the protests, with the pandemic, tragic killing of Breonna Taylor, the Hillard Heinz review, since then, Department of Justice investigation. We just want to take this opportunity to bring everybody up to speed. We've been communicating here and there since then, obviously, but this is more of a comprehensive update today. We're going to start with a slideshow of about 20-25 slides or so to kind of give everybody a baseline of information, and then the chief and I and several other folks from Metro government will then stay on the line and answer any questions that come in up till around 3:15-ish or so. So we'll see how many questions we've got coming in and can adjust if we need to, but that's currently the plan. So again, we appreciate everybody joining us now. So for her intro comments, Chief Shields, what's on your mind this fine afternoon?
Hi, Mayor, and thank you to everyone who's participating in this. It's really important to myself and the mayor that you understand that we are not waiting idly by to see what the DOJ may or may not present, that we are working on so many fronts to ensure that we are ahead of whatever report comes out. And there's a lot of work that's been done. That doesn't mean we acknowledge we have a lot to do, but a lot of work has been done. And I just like to say thank you for participating in today's forum. Thank you, Mayor.
Well, thanks, Chief. And before we start, I want to commend you. When we were looking for a new police chief, I was looking for a reform-minded police chief. And Erika Shields was by far and away our top candidate. Obviously, a big city police chief experience with Atlanta. And she knew what she was getting into here. As you'll hear throughout this presentation, I'm sure she had some experience, kind of a case that had some similarities to Breonna Taylor's tragedy. And she said, no, my life calling is to do this kind of work. And her goal is to help redefine what policing looks like in the 21st century. So Chief, I want to thank you again for stepping up to the call.
Thank you, Mayor.
So let's just start off with a little history about where we've been to set the context for this conversation. If you could go to the next slide, Chris. And then the next one after that. My way of managing and leading throughout my career is basically, if you're in any kind of organization of any size or any relationship or any family, unfortunately, things are going to go wrong from time to time. So the question then is, okay, what do you do when things go wrong? And how do you prepare yourself to minimize those chances? So specifically, as we focus on the police department, there's a track record of us trying to stay on top of things. In 2013, we created our Office for Safe and Healthy Neighborhoods, just to address the non-police part of gun violence. In 2016, we were one of 15 cities in the country recognized by the White House as a model of President Obama's 21st century policing. So that involved us doing self-audits, self-capability, and it was similar to what we were always trying to do to find out areas where we were weak and improve. In 2016, 2017, I asked two of the leading police chiefs in the country to come visit us. Ron Davis was heading the community-oriented policing office at the White House, former police chief of Oakland, and then Chuck Ramsey, police chief in Washington, D.C. and Philadelphia, a well-known CNN commentator now, just to spend a day with us to kind of say, what do you think? How do things look to you? And both of them said, look, you guys are a medium, big-sized police department. Looks like you're in good shape. A couple issues here and there, but no major gaps. 2019, we were certified and passed what's called ICAT, Integrated Communications Assessment and Tactics Training. That's all about de-escalation. So it was very important to us to learn de-escalation tactics, and the chief will get into that. So the point is that all along we've been trying to improve. But as you'll see in the next slide, and as history will remind you, sometimes tragedy takes place, unfortunately. And in our case, obviously, Chris, if you can change the slide, it was the tragic death of Breonna Taylor in our community. And then, of course, the public had already tuned into George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery's murders, and then Breonna Taylor's killing became much more recognized around the country as parts of that case became public. That led to massive social justice marches across the nation, some 2,000 cities. And obviously in Louisville, we were one of what I thought were the 4 really pronounced areas of marches during that time period. Minneapolis with George Floyd, here with Breonna, and then you had Seattle and Portland, and that was more around anarchy, if you will. But we were the home of the 2 really social justice, racial justice protests. So big change on reckoning came up here in 2020. So then, the question is, what do we do? If we look at the next slide. You can deny, you can try to obstruct, whatever, but that's not our style here, and certainly not been my style of managing over the years and leading. So we leaned right into it. One of the first things, obviously, that I did here in the mayor's office was ban no-knock warrants. And then the Metro Council formalized that into law, called Breonna's Law. What guided me throughout the whole process was following due process. And by that, I mean there is an investigative process, there's a judicial process, a legal process that handles these various situations that came up in a tragedy like this. I know a lot of people were impatient with me and frustrated with me during that time because they wanted me to be the judge, the jury, and the executioner on our police officers, for instance. And I said, I frankly don't have all the facts. We've got to let due process play out. But that is why we turned our files over to the state attorney general and the FBI. In the meantime, we did have enough facts to fire a few officers, and we took that action when we had those facts. But it was very clear that we, LMPD, should not be investigating LMPD. So again, we turned files over from the state side to the attorney general to ask them to take the investigation, and then on the federal side, handed the files over to the FBI so the federal investigations could take place. So we were out of the loop at that point in time. Then the one thing we could control was settling the lawsuit, civil lawsuit with Breonna Taylor's estate, her family. So we moved quickly on that, and much to the credit of the family and their team, it wasn't just a payment. We also had some requirements relative to community-related police programs, search warrant reforms, and then police accountability reforms. And you'll see many of those referenced to in addition to other reforms as we can now go into our next slide. Also want to mention that we had discipline that was taking place throughout that process. I want to recognize Interim Police Chief Yvette Gentry, who led very courageously during that time frame and took actions and upheld actions on some of our police officers during that time frame. So I want to say thank you publicly to Yvette Gentry. The protest has led to massive change and over 150 public safety reform efforts throughout the police department and through Metro government as well. So we have not waited for the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice came here in April of 2021, a couple of weeks after they announced they were going to investigate the police in Minneapolis with the George Floyd murder. So we were expecting them to come here as well, and they did. And then some cities, kind of work against that. We have not, it's not been the case with us. We've been an open book with them. But the main thing what I want to get across here is that if we can get any way we can get better, faster with policing and police community trust, we're going to do that. We're not playing any legal games. We're just going to get to work on that. So protest leads to change. And I want to start up front by thanking our protest community. I know these protests were energizing to many. They were frustrating to many. They made some people uncomfortable. When you go through protests the way our country did, last big protest, civil rights protests in the 1960s, it's going to be uncomfortable for some people. And it should be uncomfortable because it needs to lead to change. So I want to thank our protesters for what they did, largely peaceful. I want to thank our police officers for figuring out how to work through a situation like this. And was everything perfect? No. But our city, compared to how we handled the protest to some of the other big cities, we did it in a way where we got through it. And I want to say thank you again to everybody for that. Here were some of the major pathways to change. The Hillard Heinz report. I asked Hillard Heinz to come in. We contracted them. I wanted them to do a top to bottom review of the police department. This process took place during the protest, shortly after the protest, because I wanted an outside agency to do a full third-party review of the police department. That led to leadership changes within LMPD, leading up to the hiring of our Chief of Police, Erika Shields. Rihanna's law was passed banning no-knock warrants. Talked about that already, along with the settlement with the Taylor estate. We made revisions to the FOP contract. Chief will talk more about those. I want to thank the FOP for working with us on that. I want to thank the 490 group. They were not a protest group, but part of the demands for change that helped us see different points of view relative to the FOP contract. The ACLU played a role in that as well on our open records. And then we had lots of meetings going on with different protest groups around the city to understand what their frustrations were, where they saw that we needed to make change. And then, of course, lots of cooperation, working back and forth with the police department, the county attorney, other people in my mayor's office as well. We got a fortunate financial break when the American Rescue Plan funds became available, because that's allowed us to now fund a whole of government approach to public safety in a much more robust way. We'll get more into detail on that. And then the last pathway to change, obviously, is the Department of Justice investigation. We did not invite them in. They said they were coming in. And when they come in, you have a choice. You can cooperate or you can obstruct. Obviously, our path that we've taken has been cooperation, because there's no secrets. We are the people's business in government. We're open data by default. You can go on our website and see all the stuff that we have that belongs to the people. And that's our approach with the Department of Justice as well. So the specific categories of reform on the next slide you'll see are the American Rescue Plan funded reforms and whole of government approach to public safety. So think about these as non-police areas. Too often with people, when they think about public safety, they immediately want to talk about the police. The police are the reactive part. They're the law enforcement part. So it's much broader when we're building public safety than just the police. So we've got an approach to public safety that includes organizational changes, tactical and procedural changes, training changes, accountability changes, obviously openness or transparency, improving officer working conditions, technology investments, and new community engagement efforts. First area, I'll be turning over to the chief here in a second, is greater funding this whole of government approach. So it's a 6-pillar whole of government, whole of city approach to public safety, of which law enforcement is just one. It's the fourth on there. The first is, what's our theory for how we create a safe city and how do we mobilize the community around that? What are our investments in intervention and prevention so that illegal behavior does not take place, and then how we can show folks there's a whole bunch of different ways of living than going down a path of crime. So let's intervene to build capacity. America has a fault, in my view, that they invest after there's a problem. We should invest more before there's a problem to build capacity in our communities, especially communities of low income, where we know there's data that indicates early intervention has big payoff. So whether it's intervention or prevention, law enforcement is the fourth, and then organizational change and development that comes when you're learning how to do all this better. And of course, you can't forget reentry. So reentry, when somebody gets out of prison, when somebody gets out of jail, you have to bring them back into a community that gives them housing, or make sure they have housing, make sure that they have a job so that they don't get desperate and then go back down into a life of crime. So those are the 6-pillar whole of government approach. Chief?
Thank you, Mayor. I echo the mayor's sentiments on the 6th pillar, the whole of government. Having been a career cop, I can say that police never wanted to be on the front lines of engaging and managing and being responsible for complaints against the homeless community. That came out out of necessity when there was defunding for all of the outreach efforts. It started for us in Atlanta in the 90s. And what you saw is police have become the go-to for most every socioeconomic issue. And the problem there is that is not what we're trained on. And we're investing a huge amount of training in that area, but it does go directly against what our primary responsibilities are. And it's criminal behavior as opposed to someone who's got underlying conditions driving their behavior. And so I can't say enough about the fact that Louisville is now making sincere efforts to fund a number of outreach programs. One that I am particularly enthused about because I realize the immediate benefit of it. There's a 911 diversion program. And well, the first thing that 911 is doing is it's creating, there's a medical unit. They have a triage in 911 center where individuals who are trained professionally on medical issues are able to triage calls to determine, does a cop need to go to this call, or is a caseworker who's trained on mental health and other issues, are they adequate? And so what you're seeing is the 911 center now has the ability to redirect calls. So it's not just everything going to the police department. There may be calls where in the 911 center they feel as though an officer should accompany the caseworker, and certainly we'll do that jointly. But it's a huge relief to me to know that we're not going to have to be the front lines for all responses related to issues where there are so many other factors at play. So I appreciate that investment was prioritized by the mayor's administration and city council. It's huge. So thank you.
Thanks, Chief. That's just one example. And as you look at this slide right now about the greater funding role of government, I just want to emphasize here, because after we talk through this next two slides, a lot of this is going to be about policing. But I just want everybody to know that there's more at work than just policing. So we've been talking about the Office for Safe and Healthy Neighborhoods. One of their main functions is the violence deterrence and prevention program, specifically the community violence interruption work that we do, where we're trying to stop gun violence. Gun violence is too high in the community. Fortunately, we're down about 12% for the year in homicides and about 30% in shootings. So what our violence interrupters do is try to stop gun violence before it happens, tries to stop retribution, which so often happens with some of our gun or some of our drug and gang type of killings. And so that's a really important part of OSHN, what we call the Safe and Healthy Neighborhoods Office, but then much more as well. We've got to recognize that violence and gun violence in particular and the pandemic led to a lot of trauma in the community that's still here. So we've got a very large trauma resilient community initiative available ongoing in the community. The GVI program, Group Violence Intervention, what that does is it identifies the shooters and shot callers in our community, those that are committing most of the gun violence or susceptible of gun violence, and then communicates with these folks to basically say, we know who you are and what you're doing. We want to give you an off-ramp out of this life, and here's what the off-ramp looks like. But if you choose to stay in this life of gun violence and murder and mayhem, then these are the accountability structures that you can expect for you and the group that you affiliate with. So GVI is fully underway. And the chief just talked about the 911 call diversion program, where maybe somebody calls in, they got a mental health problem, or they're witnessing a homeless person, and a police response is not the most appropriate response. So we send a mental health counselor, a homeless specialist, so they can take care of that, and the police are free to do something else. And then as we look at the next slide, talked about the organizational changes. So one, obviously, we talked about hiring a new chief. Chief, you want to take it from here?
Yes, thank you. So coming in, what was critical to me that the department do immediately is shift its focus to violent crime. And I'm a firm believer that as law enforcement agencies, that has to be our primary focus, and that the means to reduce violent crime is to focus on illegal guns and those individuals using illegal guns. So how do you accomplish that? You accomplish that using intelligence-led policing, which is not just some fancy term. It is truly taking open source data that is available. It may be social media, Google, prior known acts of violence, and identifying those individuals who are driving the violence in your city. Why are these two things so important? The focusing on the violent crime and how you get there. Because when you look at policing and the space that we're in, there has been over the years a huge amount of emphasis on the quantity of arrests. And that's really quite honestly how police departments have been graded, is what's the data look like? What is your number of arrests and where's your crime rate? Unfortunately, when that's your singular focus or your primary focus, what's lost in the process is the process. How did you get there? Did you get there in a fair and equitable manner? So by focusing on violent crime, we are focusing on those individuals who are creating the greatest harm to the community as a whole. And I will stand up all day and feel comfortable stating why we are going after individuals who are shooting, robbing, carjacking others. But how do you get there? So I want us to have quality enforcement versus quantity. So we're going after the violent offenders. But you can't just be stopping cars right and left. You can't just be doing stop and frisk. This has been done for decades. You have to have an articulable reason for why you're there and for what you're doing. And for that to occur or to be present, you have to know who you're looking for and why. And so my posture from day one to the department has been, yes, we're going after violent criminals, but here's how I want you to get there. You have to use intelligence. You have to be able to show that you were justified in being in the space you were in and why you were pursuing what you're pursuing. So that for me is really when you talk about organization, that's not a maybe so much an operational move, but that is a cultural move, because if you're not focusing on the right priority, you get in trouble. What are some of the more administrative moves that you will do, that we've done? Technology has been a huge asset to law enforcement in the last 15 years, but it's all been outward facing. How do we target crime? Very little of it has been inward to the law enforcement agency of how can you improve your performance. What we did is we created an accountability and improvement bureau. And really, it's largely internal facing, and it's looking at how are we conducting ourselves, and are we prioritizing? Are we placing equal priority on how we conduct ourselves day in and day out as officers, as opposed to just what are the end results? So how do you get there? Well, the first thing is we've created an audit unit and hired multiple civilian auditors whose skill set is doing just that. I don't need a cop doing it. And we're having them focus on those key areas that are so important to our performance, and also have been some Achilles heels. So it's domestic violence. Let me back up by saying the one thing that technology has where law enforcement has benefited probably most greatly from technology in the last decade is body-worn cameras. Prior to body-worn cameras being around, it was really he said, she said. It was a lot of gray. The body-worn camera removes a lot of that. And so fortunately, when I got here, the city had already purchased them for the officers. They're using them. The auditor's focus is largely on the body-worn cameras. And so if an officer goes to a domestic violence call, are they interacting with that domestic violence victim in a manner that is appropriate? Are they affording them every service? Are they making arrests when they should be? Use of force incidents. The auditors are reviewing use of force incidents. Basic courtesy. Are we talking to people in a manner that is respectable? This is so important because if we're not focused on our performance daily, and our approach is one of, well, we're only going to invest time and energy into it when there's a critical incident, a crisis, or some PR disaster, we will never improve. So that's what this audit unit is doing. In that bureau, we've also hired a diversity and inclusion director. They are responsible for not just looking how are we interacting with our minority communities in the city, but how are we treating one another? And are there mechanisms in place internally that are creating a disproportionate impact on some of our minority employees? So that's just a couple of things that we have going within the Bureau, but they are key to our success.
I'll just add in there too, to emphasize the civilian content that, or civilian resources that the chief is bringing in, so that there's an outside viewer, not just a police view of training, auditing in particular. So that's a balance that she saw in other police departments that we didn't have enough of here. Chief?
Right, thank you. So there were a number of things that the city had done prior to my arrival, and I'm the beneficiary of. The search warrant policy was amended to require multiple sign-offs. So it's just not, you have to have multiple supervisory levels signing off on any search warrant. The warrants are served, if a warrant requires that force be used, it's served by a specialty unit. It's not just, we have to ensure that the folks that are serving these warrants are training on this on a regular basis. No-knock warrants, they're banned. And that's, it's worked fine. And I think it's hard to argue against that after what has happened across the US. The use of force policy has been amended. There's been multiple iterations. Chokeholds are banned. There's much greater emphasis in our policy on de-escalation, and with the expectation being that you de-escalate. Not that, oh, that worked out well, someone did de-escalate, but rather my posture is, and we're putting into the policy and expecting of our employees, that they may have used a lower level of force, which is good, but that's still not good enough. Good enough is, was there an option to completely de-escalate so no force was necessary? Duty to intervene. Obviously, that was never more transparent, more apparent than what we saw in Minneapolis. So as Derek Chauvin is choking to death George Floyd, I think that beyond the initial horror at watching an officer do this, there's the next question is, how are their officers just standing and watching this? And I'm not going to give them a pass, but I will say that we also do have a culture that is very much based on seniority. That just goes with law enforcement. And so we want it to be very clear in black and white that regardless of whether you're on the street a week or 20 years, you have a duty to do the right thing. And if you see an employee, a colleague who is using excessive force or too much force, you have an obligation to intervene. So I think there's been and the tear gas. The tear gas, that amendment requires that either myself or my designee allow for it to be used.
Right, next slide, please.
The training division is, without question, one of the ones that I've been most enthused about. It's been hard to get to the space that we're in, but we're there. We finally have some traction. One of the things that I felt really strongly about is that the police academies have historically been run by police. And the reason for that is there's a large amount of training that is required by state laws, by state law. A lot of our training is tactical, a lot of it's physical. But as you're moving into the space where we are currently, and there's an emphasis on de-escalation, more emotional intelligence, self-awareness, one of the things that I think has always stuck me is what we prioritize as law enforcement in an academy doesn't necessarily reflect what the community wants to see out of the academy. And so it's really important to me that we get eyes in our academy and people at the table making decisions at our academy who are civilians, and not just civilians from everyday Joes who might do whatever. We need academic professionals, individuals who are recognized in the field of academia for their work. They have to be at the table driving what we are doing and also in reviewing how we've performed. So we have hired a co-academy director who's a doctor from the field of education. We've hired curriculum writers, and they're responsible for reviewing the curriculums we're teaching for appropriateness, relevance, awareness. It's the subject matter experts looking at how we're performing. But then the other thing is the curriculum writers and the academic director also will be proctoring and seeing how our instructors are performing. We are not professional educators, and we've all had teachers who are much better than others. So we want to ensure that we have the right people in front of the room instructing and are using the most appropriate teaching tools that are out there. There's a huge emphasis on leadership development. We've embraced that. We've got Blue Courage is an executive leadership program designed for our higher ranks, our upper management, and it's really exposing them to many different thought leaders from around different professions. Some are public speakers. It's not police oriented. It's getting people exposed to other way of doing things. So that's just, I can't say enough. I have placed huge value in external training and leadership training. We've developed a training curriculum for our entry-level supervisors, 2 weeks long on leadership. But my emphasis is really to get people to get exposure and experience constant learning. And I think if you stop learning, you fail. And so that's really the push that the academies, that's the direction we're going in.
Chief, let's stop for just a second here and take a couple of questions that are coming in. First is from Raven Scott, who's asking, how are we changing the hiring process to police recruits undergo psychiatric evaluation?
So police recruits, yes, they do. All new hires undergo a psychological exam. If the psychologist weighs in and says they don't believe they're fit to be hired, that's the final say. I'm not going to go against that. Obviously, we have hiring needs, and the department is lagging in the area of minorities. I've spoken about that since day one. We have designed some very targeted recruitment efforts, cities, colleges that we know have greater diversity. What I would say is the Achilles heel right now for law enforcement, not just LMPD, is people don't want to police. The profession took obviously a huge hit in 2020 for multiple reasons, and really the profession as a whole has to rebrand itself and become desirable. And there's a confluence of factors. There's the economy is by and large well. Folks are content not working. Our profession needs rebranding. Salaries are competitive. I believe the pendulum will come back. It always does. But right now we are in line with many of the most law enforcement agencies across the country, and we're struggling to hire. But absolutely, diversity is top of mind for us.
Recruiting's picked up, fortunately, and we'll get more into compensation and benefits later. We've got to be attractive and competitive. A 2-year police officer now can be making around $80,000 a year. So we've radically changed the attractiveness of the position while we invest more in the community. And I'll take this question from Kiki Young on that and throw that to Paul Callanan, who runs our Office for Safe and Healthy Neighborhood Efforts. Paul, the question is, are the outreach programs you all are funding, do they benefit the low-income neighborhoods?
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. The answer to that question is yes, they do. Over the past year, the Office for Safe and Healthy Neighborhoods, we received $15 million in American Rescue Funds for violence intervention programs, an additional $8 million in American Rescue Funds for violence prevention programs. And 90% of that funds go directly back to the community into funding community-led programs to address violence, particularly gun violence in communities. And how we determine where that funding goes is based on where we see the trends of gun violence across the city, which is predominantly in certain neighborhoods across the city, and mostly on the west side. We see some a little bit on the south side. When people apply for those funds, they have to answer two questions. One, they have to show that they understand how gun violence are impacting those neighborhoods, and more importantly, to your question, Kiki, they have to demonstrate how their program will benefit that community as well, too.
And that's in the public safety realm, Kiki. Just want to emphasize that non-public safety programs like Evolve 502, that is a scholarship program that's available to all Jefferson County Public School graduates with free tuition to JCTC or Simmons College, education, a post-secondary degree, or credentials. The number one disruptor of poverty, at the root of almost all of our crime is poverty and too many guns. So there's an education outlet that's free. And then also our down payment homeowner assistance grants that allow people to start building wealth in their community. Folks, particularly most of those go to our Black community that's been redlined out of mortgages in the past. So there's a whole array of non-public safety programs that are directed at our low income neighborhoods. Chief Anita Chandler, this is making a point, and this goes into so much of the difficulty behind Breonna's tragedy. And that's was there was no body camera evidence. And Anita says every officer should have a camera for protection of our officers and citizens, period, exclamation point. So why weren't there body cameras with the folks serving the warrants at Breonna's apartment? And then what's the status on body worn cameras for all of our officers?
No, thank you. That's a fantastic and wholly appropriate question. So let me tell you, when I was the chief in Atlanta, we rolled out body worn cameras, and I was under the impression that all of our people had cameras. I didn't want there to be exceptions. I think it's too critical. We had an officer involved shooting, and the officer was on a federal task force. So why are federal task force important? Because we have to have this communication and these relationships, or you get what occurred during 9/11. 9/11 was an absolute communication debacle, and it highlighted how the feds were so siloed from the rest of the world. So we do put people on federal task forces, and in return, we get their expertise, their technology, their monies. So my officer is involved in this shooting, and they're on a federal task force. Well, imagine my alarm when I asked the staff to tee up the body-worn camera so I could make a determination if it was a good shooting or just what. And they said, oh, no, the feds don't wear them. I was shocked because central to President Obama's 21st century on policing was body-worn cameras. The feds had provided hundreds of millions of dollars for all of us to wear body-worn cameras in local government. And the DOJ had made it a speaking point that local governments should all be wearing body-worn cameras. So talk about Big Brother not really looking in the mirror. I made a decision, a very difficult decision, and I removed the Atlanta Police Department from all of the federal task forces. It was that important to me that we had body-worn camera footage. I just did not feel that day and age, which would have been 2017, that we could not have that level of transparency. Thankfully, my fellow major city chiefs backed me up, and they agreed with me. Because once they did that, the feds realized they had to change. They could have maybe just lost Atlanta. They couldn't have every major city saying, we're pulling out of your task forces. So the federal government amended their policies and changed it so that they understand that now let me be clear, the feds still aren't wearing the cameras. But if we're on a federal task force, our people are allowed to wear a camera. Why do I give you this story? Because what happens is police and law enforcement, local, state, federal, they carve out these these exceptions that they feel are appropriate. And I'm sure that here, like many other cities, it was carved out that, well, the work that we're doing is, you know, we got some undercover officers on the team. We don't want, you know, we don't want them to have their face and body worn camera. We're doing undercover work. You get these carve outs at all agencies at all levels, and they are dangerous. And very often, just like my shooting in Atlanta, you don't realize these have been carved out until there's a critical incident. That being said, all of our employees have body worn cameras, are required to wear them. There are not carve outs. And so I think you're spot on, but I will also tell you, I promise you, there's still agencies around the country that are not wearing them all the time. And it's unfortunate because I think it really is a disservice to the public.
So that, just to emphasize, that was one of the reasons why there was such lack of clarity around the shooting at Breonna Taylor's apartment, because they were undercover officers executing that warrant, and there was a cut for them where they did not have to wear body-worn cameras. And of course, that lack of clarity led to all kinds of confusion, misrepresentation of the facts, that just further kind of intensified the feelings around her tragic killing there. That's not the case anymore in terms of the requirement for the body-worn cameras. Chief, before we go back to the presentation, let's take two other questions. They're related, one from Jewel and one from Tia, and they're about shot spotters, and asking whether or not, what our position is on shot spotters, and have they helped us solve any crimes in the community?
So thank you. You know, it's funny. I was really opposed to shot spotter in Atlanta because I thought it was just so expensive. I really had a problem with it. My background prior to policing is in finance, so I can be pretty frugal. When I came here, the department already had some shot spotter. And so I had a bead on it thinking, I don't know if we should be making this investment. And I've got to tell you, I was wrong. Because what Shot Spotter was doing is it was making us aware of shootings where we did not have people calling 911. And it was allowed for two main things. The first and most significant is we have actually found people who are shot and no one called 911. And fortunately, we've been able to save a couple of lives there, and a couple of them, quite honestly, we found they were homicide victims. So I think that awareness, particularly in communities that are just worn down by gun violence, which is a whole nother issue, it's sad. It's sad, and I recognize that no one should have to live in such a way that they don't feel compelled to call when they hear gunshots because it's that routine. So that's why my focus is on violent crime. But it has helped us absolutely be more responsive to those neighborhoods that are experiencing gun violence. The officers also get the alerts so they can get there much more promptly. It's allowed us to collect some critical evidence when we would otherwise not be able to get it, and then tie crimes together. So I do have to say, I think that within reason, I wouldn't recommend the investment for an area that does not have violent crime, or it's very sporadic every couple of years. But for those communities that are struggling with violent crime, it's a very, very important tool.
Thank you, Chief. All right, Paul, or Chris, let's go back to the slide deck now, and we'll talk. Yeah, so the first part of this is we're going to now go through a few more accountability changes. We recognize that the trust in some parts of the community of the police department is low here in Louisville, all over the country, but particularly when you have a high-profile tragedy like we had. So we wanted to create some external groups here that could serve as a citizen's eyes over allegations of improper conduct within the police department. So we created a Citizens Review and Accountability Board that's led by an Inspector General. The board is up and running with Civilian Board, and then the gentleman has been hired for our Inspector General some 6 months or so ago. So that's an outside accountability group, if you will. And then the chief has executed many other reforms from within the department, Chief.
Right. So one of the things that jumped out at me when I came here, well, there's two things. One was the backlog of what would be referred to as internal affairs complaint files. I'm a firm believer that if you're going to if you're going to hold an employee accountable and you want to change their job performance and improve on it, you need to be acting in a timely manner. And by the same token, it was this equally important is that when a citizen makes a complaint, they need to hear back from the police department in a reasonable amount of time that someone took their complaint to heart. And I was very concerned because these files were not moving in a timely manner. That is a priority to me. We cleaned up all the backlog. My goal is whenever we have a complaint, whether it's initiated by my office or if it's initiated by someone who comes in off the street, we owe it to both the officer and the complainant that we give a response. And we give an explanation for either why we're sustaining or not sustaining it. The other thing that was absent for me that I felt needed addressing immediately was there was not an existing discipline matrix. There's always mitigating factors to every incident, but there is a baseline of discipline that you should be able to expect. And that, to me, to not have it is wholly unfair to the employees, because what you're saying to them is, well, we're just going to flip a coin. I mean, they don't know what's going to happen. They should have some idea. They should have some idea what a discipline range is on for a behavior, but also to the public. The public should be able to see that. So we created a discipline matrix as a guideline for this is what you can expect. Again, like I stated, there's always mitigating factors, but you can definitely have a baseline. So those things are huge to me that we did. The other thing that, and this goes back to the FOP contract, what it allowed for was there wasn't drug testing on an employee after a critical incident. And I think that goes to the trust that if an employee if they're in a traffic accident and it causes serious bodily injury to someone or themselves, I think that the community wants to know, okay, are they held to the same standard we are? Is someone checking them for drugs and alcohol? And I have confidence the employee's going to test fine. Maybe that's my naive state, but I do believe that. And I think that we just needed to take that extra step and show that we were holding our employees to the same standard that we would expect of the public. And so that has been added to the policy as well.
Just for that too, I just want to emphasize and say thank you. That was part of the Breonna Taylor settlement. So the family helped us improve. The 490 group, another protest group, said, this is obvious as well. I can tell you from my standpoint, when I started my career in manufacturing, we had a drug policy test there. I worked around sheet metal machines. I wanted to make sure everybody was sober. I didn't want to go home missing a finger or a hand. And so that's just required. And after any incident, we would add drug testing there. So the FOP worked with us on this as well. So this is an example of how we all came together to make the community safer by working together. So thank you to everybody for that. We also, now when there's an officer involved shooting, you may recall that we used to do those shootings ourselves. After the Breonna Taylor incident, we said we can't do that anymore. So we asked Kentucky State Police to do our officer involved shooting investigations. So there's a third party review. However, what that did was they take longer to release the body camera evidence because they want to complete all of the interviews with people around that particular crime. And so it takes more time, but it is a third party. So I just want to recognize there's some frustration in the community over that from time to time because it may take or does take longer than when LMPD released the body camera evidence. Now, a big issue next as we go to the next slide is related to the transparency efforts that we have. That's a kind of a suite of approach. So we talked about body cameras. Chief has got some other technology investments here that have helped and some other basics we should have in place. Chief?
Yes, so one of the great advancements, Axon Technology has really been a leader in police transparency and technology, and the Axon is who we get our body-worn cameras from. Well, they created a feature whereby when you remove your gun from the holster, the camera automatically goes on. And this is huge. So I mean, I think for anybody that's had to deal with technology and storage space, you understand why you can't just have the cameras run continually. The battery will be gone. You'll have an exhaustive amount of empty space, and the storage is just it's not feasible. But so most of the times your officer should have the camera on, but every now and then, I mean, our job is one where a lot of stuff just falls on you. And so this immediately prompts your camera to start recording if you remove your gun from the holster. That's huge. Technology that we're working towards now that will be really helpful. It's taken a while to procure, and we also have to get it aligned with the state system because some of our technology, the state is the backbone of, and that is because reporting requirements for local agencies go through the states and then onto the federal government. So that's not an anomaly. This is not uncommon, but we need to be able to see real time the details on our officers in their traffic enforcement so that I can see just how many stops they're doing, the demographics of the individuals that they're stopping, dashboards that automate data in such a manner that we can really weigh the quality of an employee's performance. Right now, we can weigh the quantity, but that goes back to what I spoke to earlier. You've got to know the process and how they're getting to that end result. So that's being worked on. It's taking a while for the reasons I just mentioned. We also are using these dashboards to try to report out to the public. I don't know how many folks actually look at them, but I do think it's important that people be able to see where we're at and what we're trying to accomplish. Another thing that we're doing is our internal affairs files. Those are released in their entirety. I'm a firm believer that once a file is closed, it should be available. It's just you can't get trust if you're not willing to release the entirety of an investigation. It should not just be, I think previously it was just the supervisor's summary. And to the mayor's, what he spoke to briefly is Kentucky State Patrol has been a very gracious partner. I know that they are well below staffing as well. And so for them to take over our officer-involved shootings is a huge ask for them. It's my sincere hope that the state will eventually create its own investigative agency. Many states have that. I think that's more doable than putting it all on the KSP. And so KSP, their policy applies to the entire state. They can't just have a policy for Louisville and then a different one for the different state, for different jurisdictions. So to the mayor's point, theirs is to complete the file and release the body-worn camera. What I will say is when we do the investigation, and this is what I need folks to understand, we will release the footage as soon as we can. But what is the most important thing that we do, if our officers involved in the shooting and we're doing the investigation, I've got to get the statements from the involved officers and witnesses secured before it's released to the media. Why? People remember what they saw last. I want my officers and I want the public to tell us what they thought they saw. What did they see? What drove their decision making? What was the perception of the public? And if we're releasing to the media within a day or so or less the body-worn camera footage, we're not going to be able to get that perspective. And that's critical to the authenticity of an investigation. So we scramble as much as we can to get the officer statements that transcribed, witness identified, get their statements, and then we release the footage. So that, I just want folks to understand why sometimes they're not seeing the footage released in the first 2 or 3 days.
All right, thanks, Chief. Next slide. So Chief's talked about the challenge right now of recruiting, retaining. Fortunately, recruiting is up, but policing all over the country is down, and there's openings almost in every organization, for-profit, nonprofit, public agencies as well, and the police department is no exception to that. So We're investing in our police department in some strong ways, much as we're investing outside of the police department. Chief, you want to run through these quickly?
Thank you. So the salary increases made a dramatic difference in our applicants and our hiring efforts. We were really struggling, and that made a huge difference. This year to date, we're at 75 versus I think 56 from last year, but we have a number of people in the pipeline, whereas prior to the salary adjustments, we weren't even having the applicants. Facility improvements, the AT&T building has been purchased and is undergoing the necessary renovations to get LMPD in there. This is huge because what happens is we have units all over the city, and that is not the best way to be supervising the operations. You need to be able to see people, see what they're doing day in and day out, having communication. We're missing. It's a supervisory issue, and so I really look forward to us getting under one facility. Wellness initiatives, what you've seen in the last probably decade is you've seen an emphasis or an awareness of it is not reasonable to think that police can be exposed to constant trauma and not process it in a variety of ways. And by that, I mean, if we have an individual who witnesses a homicide, a fatal car accident, is a teacher and their student's been sexually assaulted, that is a traumatic incident, and we provide services, or we should, to try to help that person understand it, cope with it, and be able to go on and not harbor anger, depression. So in law enforcement, that's not been our history. You just need to suck it up. The problem is, so we're having these officers go out, see violent homicides, see families obliterated in car accidents, see children who are being raped and molested, and we're saying, why are you angry? Why are you not performing well? What's your problem? And it was one of these cultural things. It's taken our profession a while to get past itself. So there's a real concerted effort around saying, okay, we've got to make investments financially in individuals who are skilled professionals at helping navigate trauma. And so we're in the process of hiring a department psychologist. There'll be a couple of consultants or contract employees who work as counselors. We've put a huge amount of training into our peer support team. We're working to try to procure a wellness center that will allow for have equipment so employees can work out, invest in their physical health. It's important. We cannot expect officers to be performing at a high level if we're not taking the time and investing in where they are mentally. And that has been absent from our profession forever. The promotional process, I have heartburn around that. Because Kentucky is a collective bargaining state, the promotional process is governed and civil service weighs into it. My history with civil service, working in law enforcement all these years, is unfortunately there's often not the attention paid to the detail in the promotional exams that there would be otherwise, and it's easier for employees to be eliminated for reasons that are very arbitrary. I think for transparency and to ensure that you are in fact testing on those things employees need to be tested on, you really have to have professionals. This goes back to individuals who are subject matter experts in the field. helping create and administer these exams. So we're trying to figure out how we can have a third party work with us on this while still meeting the requirements of the state and what's required by civil service. And the recruiting efforts we've gone over, we're in a much improved state, and I'm really happy that we've opened up and developed a training platform for laterals, because the advantage of a lateral is it's a known quantity and you can typically get them trained up to speed in a much shorter amount of time.
Chief, a lateral is someone moving to our
Oh, I'm
department.
sorry. Right, right. So one of the things that we have now is if you have policed for at least 3 years at another agency, you can apply to LMPD to come in here and be hired as a cop, and you will still go through a training academy, but it would be shorter than someone who's just coming in off the street and maybe leaving a completely different profession, coming from a completely different profession. Yes, sir.
Thank you. And we also have a rehire program available for police officers that had the experience that we went back on the force, and they want to come back on the force as well to help us beef up here. The Chief talked about trauma. I want to emphasize too, we have a trauma-informed care program available for the community. We'll be entering a period here in a couple of weeks where there'll be free counseling available for a month. That's run by our Office for Safe and Healthy Neighborhoods and designed in partnership with the community. So Paul, if you'd come back on, Kiki has a question that says, what about programs created and organized by the people of the community for the people of the community? Those are the type of programs y'all need to be funding, because y'all can't come in with cultural differences thinking you all understand what the community really needs. So can you talk a little bit about how the community is involved with developing the programs and executing the programs?
Yeah, this is a really good question from Kiki, and I think it's critical to understand what she's saying. And we know that in order to successfully address violence in our communities, that those solutions have to come from the community. So one thing that we value right now is that what we call authentic community engagement. And really what that means is that when we're looking at solutions to violence, violence impacts each neighborhood differently across our city. And in order to be most effective, we have to give those residents, those people that live in those neighborhoods, both a voice in sort of determining what strategies are best for them, and then ownership over those strategies, so they control what goes on in response in their neighborhoods to violence. And a couple of ways we do that right now is, for example, we have our community mobilization initiative. We have 6 community-led, neighborhood-level violence prevention coalitions. These are coalitions in 6 neighborhoods across and within our city that consist of residents and business owners that have come together, designed their own violence prevention reduction model unique to their neighborhood. They have come up with their own strategies after assessing their own needs and what they felt was what was needed in their community, and we provide funding for those programs. In addition to that, we, through our ambassador program, periodically, several times through the year, every other month, we host programs, our Ambassador Institute, where we allow residents to come in and learn more about maybe effective violence prevention strategies in general, but this allows them to go back into their communities and look about how they as individuals can maybe elicit change and begin to implement programs. And then we complement that with, we have a program where it's our community-based capacity building programs, where if people have good ideas and they're very grassroots organizations and they really want to do some work in the area of violence prevention, but they don't know how, we'll enter them into a program with us for about a year or two, where we help, take that idea, put it into a concept, put it into play, and build their organization up where they can actually create those programs unique to their own community. So it's a good question by Kiki, and I think, we're very committed to giving that avenue for the communities in our neighborhoods to have that voice and ownership that's needed.
Thanks, Paul, and thanks for the question, Kiki. And for our folks on Facebook, we'll be on for another 15 minutes or so, so please answer or please put any questions you have in there that we'll be happy to get to them. We also want to mention that the deflection model for the crisis response that the Chief talked about earlier, when we get a call into 911, if it doesn't require a police response, we'll put say, mental health specialist or a homeless specialist to that. That was a program that was designed all about the community. Spalding and the University of Louisville helped design that program. They went to the community groups to design that program, and they've designed it, and now we're executing it. So this is all part about building police community trust and designing programs together And we'll talk about more of those just here in a second. As we get past this next slide, it's about reforms and technology. I'll just do it real quick, Chief, so we'll move forward here. We're trying to use technology as our friend because if we can't hire as many police officers, maybe as we should have, we have a relatively low amount of police officers per capita as some of our peer cities like Memphis and Baltimore. We have twice the number of police officers that we have. So we've got to be smarter, and technology helps us to do that, whether it's efficiently getting a report writing through, a lot of report writing with police officers, and we need more data. So we've got software platforms that can make that easier as well. And then additional technology like more cameras, shot spotter, license plate readers. So let's say we got a camera, the shot spotter goes off. We got a camera that identifies cars in the area. We have a license plate reader that can detect a car that's suspicious, that's associated with that. It helps us solve crimes much easier than when you don't have that type of technology at work. And then obviously we want to dispatch efficiently as well. So anything else on the technology side, Chief, you want to talk about? I know you're always looking for it and your team's always trying to improve in this area.
I'm a huge believer in it. I think it leads to much stronger policing so that it's not just arbitrary traffic stops, and it's also a lot safer. Because if you have someone, for instance, who's committed a armed robbery or carjacking, this gives us an idea of where they're at so that we can get ahead of them. And so you get away from police pursuits, which I'm not a fan of. Again, it goes back to being able to speak to the public of why you're doing what you're doing. And it's not just that the officer had a gut feeling.
Yes. Just real quickly, Chief, why are you against police pursuits?
I think that the risk to the public is huge. And on occasion, you absolutely, you have to, because the person that you're pursuing is a greater risk. But no one wants to see people driving in their city recklessly or at high speeds. And I think the risk to the general public is so great that they should only be used when they absolutely essential.
All right, Dave, I'll get to your question here in a minute about subpoenas. Here's some other areas of community engagement, the Youth Advisory Council. So oftentimes when we do programs like this, it's older people that show up. We want to hear from our youth and what they're thinking, what kind of issues that they've got going on in their parts of the community. We got several volunteer programs for LMPD officers where you see them engaged in the community, again, building that kind of bond that's needed. The Louisville Police Activities League is one of those. They offer everything from cooking classes to basketball to fishing, developing those bonds between young folks and police officers so they understand that they're here to help, and if there's a problem either way, they can lean on each other. The Truth and Transformation series is about informing and educating our police officers on the history of policing, which started with slave catching, enforcing Jim Crow laws. So when a police officer shows up in a uniform in a black neighborhood in particular, they've got to be aware of kind of the historical baggage that comes with that oftentimes. The next stage of Truth and Transformation is the community meetings, really systematic throughout the city to just have that ongoing dialogue on a regular basis. And then we've talked about our Office for Safe and Healthy Neighborhood and what they do, and the Group Violence Intervention Program. And the last is our work with our faith-based community. They're very engaged. Some people want to go to the churches for information, for solace, for ideas. So Bishop Stephen Kelsey leads our faith-based community effort. On our next slide here, and Dave, this refers to the question that you asked. You said we need a review board with subpoena power to support independent investigation, not the state police. So we established our Civilian Review and Accountability Board. Don't know if you were on that call at that point in time. So that's in place, staffed by the Office for Inspector General. But they cannot compel someone to appear before that board with a subpoena because that's not allowed by the state law. So I would encourage you to lobby for that type of reform with your state representatives, state senators, get people that you know are involved with this, have them issue their point of view, and we will continue to do that from the mayor's office standpoint. There was also an issue in state law. It's a gag order that disallows me or any elected official from communicating on certain aspects of cases that are under review. And so, for instance, with the Breonna Taylor situation, there are several things that I just was not allowed to say by state law. What that does is it leads to mistrust from the community because they feel like we're hiding or we're covering up. So that needs to change in state law as well. And then the last one is an older rule in there where the chief needs to be able to assign a designee for disciplinary hearings and actions. This is a state law that covers all 120 counties. Obviously, we need a different situation here in Louisville because we're just so much bigger than some of these other counties out in the rural areas. So we're trying to get it carved out for what's called cities of the first class, which is a bigger city here like Louisville and Lexington need more flexibility. And then federal reform is needed as well. We've done our work on that with the United States Conference of Mayors, where I was the president of that a year ago, always working for systemic public safety reform. And we had the Department of Justice participate with us in May of 2021 on a reimagining public safety effort. So we put these slides up here as you think locally, also think from a state perspective and think from a federal perspective on the additional work that needs to be done here. Okay. And then last update on the DOJ. They started their patterns and practice investigation in April 2021. They are investigating potential unconstitutional actions around the use of force, including at First Amendment activities. So that means protest. Is there excessive or is there discriminatory policing? What about unreasonable stops, searches, seizures, and arrests, and the execution of warrants? And then fourthly, operations that discriminate against individuals with disabilities. So we think that is around the interest in our homeless community and how we interact with our homeless community, which has been a big recipient of a lot of the American Rescue Plan funds as well. As I mentioned with the DOJ, our mantra with them, as you look at the next slide, has been all about cooperation. So I know Matt Golden is listening in on this call. I want to commend him for the good work that he's been doing leading our effort with the Department of Justice. So thank you, Matt. There's a whole team that he leads that works on this. So we have regular meetings with the Department of Justice. We've got a dedicated project manager. We consistently provide quick responses to the DOJ's request for information. And we give them open book access to what we have here in our city records, give them their own laptops, and they have access to all of our personnel. So what we're expecting is a investigation letter from them at some point in time, whether it's next week or 3 months, we just don't know, and they won't tell us either. So we will see the areas that they've identified that we're not working on and add them to our work and get to work on that right away. And then we'll go into discussions with the Department of Justice that could just be arrange everything from here's our findings, y'all please keep working on those, to a consent decree that is a legal document that spells out the things that we need to do, how they will be overseen by a federal monitor, and it's an ongoing basis. So, you know, there's cost to all of these programs. We've already put over $20 million into enhanced efforts because of the rescue plan dollars and because of our needs to know, or our need to know where we can improve. And so we'll just have to wait and see what the DOJ says. But I think the community should understand what we've been trying to do here today is say, we've got a lot going on. There are some communities out there, and Chief, you can comment on this, that just say, you can investigate us if you want, DOJ, but we're not going to cooperate. That is not our style here. It has been, if you can make us better more quickly, we're going to fully cooperate, and that's what we've been doing. Chief, you want to add anything to that?
No, I mean, the mayor's right. I think that part of it is because the DOJ does not have a good track record for wrapping this stuff up, and it tends to cost cities a small fortune. I mean, and I would submit that if you're a losing coach for 20 years, you should have been fired, and yet there are consent decrees that have gone that long with monitors. So, but at the end of the day, if we've done stuff that's wrong, let's start fixing it now. And so that's why when I came to Louisville, I felt pretty confident, just given the lay of the land, political environment we're in, which is relevant because under President Trump, there were no there were no consent decrees, investigations of this sort. I felt pretty confident that we were going to come under a consent decree, but whether or not we were was irrelevant. I needed us to start fixing those issues we were aware of. And so Mayor Fischer and I from day one have been like, how can we improve? The Hilliard-Heinz report was a terrific roadmap. It landed in my lap right about the time I started. So kudos to the city for being forward thinking and getting that done. We've got work to do. And so I look at the DOJ, I think that their report is probably going to have many things that we're aware of and working on, and I'll be looking to see what's in there in particular that maybe we're not aware of or we're not focusing on as efficiently as we need to. But we welcome their feedback.
Good, thank you. Let's see, other couple of questions in here. We got a question from Kiki. What about dropping the charges against the protesters? This is a very critical question. So Kiki, that is up to the county attorney to do that. He's issued a press release on that yesterday. I read that of the 1,000 or so charges, or they've dropped 1,000 charges. There's another 1,000, I think he said. And Chief, you might have the data on this more than me. 700 of those have been dropped. So he's evaluating each one of those. Obviously, it depends on what the allegation is, whether or not they're going to be charged. So that's separate from my office. The county attorney is separately elected. Nancy's asking a question, Chief. How do you respond to the FOP announcing today in the Courier Journal that the current compensation package is not good enough and that policing could become inadequate in the community?
So it was really interesting because I read that and I actually thought it was an opinion piece. I didn't realize it was supposed to be a piece of journalism because it was so one-sided. And further, they weren't quoting the FOP president, who we meet with regularly. In fact, went over this slide presentation with him separately. I think that what I would say is we have made huge strides in salaries and benefits. That being said, I'm not stopping. I'm going to, whomever the new mayor is, I'm going to be approaching them and saying, listen, this is what we need to work on so that we can retain and attract the best talent. But to just paint with such a bleak brush is really pretty lame. I think that the bigger issue is, as we talked about earlier, it's the profession took such a hit, people don't want to police. That being said, the salaries, is that an issue that I will continue to focus on? Yes. But we also have the bigger issue right now is people don't want to police.
Well, I'd say, Chief, some people don't. It's not as popular as what it used to be. We're seeing different people coming to the profession.
Right. I mean, no, you're right. I mean, that's a broad stroke. It's just, we always in law enforcement, government always benefits when the economy is down, always. And so the economy has been strong. And then you layer onto it the fact that, I mean, you've got people that businesses are shutting because they just can't find people that'll work. It's just a very strange time. So yes, there are people who want to police. I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful they're coming in. We're getting qualified applicants, but the amount of interest in law enforcement across the country has taken a real hit in the last few years. Is that better?
Yeah, no, it's a change. Was just a changing environment, and policing is an inflection point in the country, right? So we'll have people that are dedicated to the profession that, we're trying to go from what some police forces were warrior mentality. It needs to be guardian mentality, right? Police show up in the neighborhood, they say, good, the police are here. That's going to take time, and it's going to take training, and it's going to take communities willing to say, okay, even though we might have a list of grievances that's 100 miles long, we're going to be good citizens and we're going to try and engage again. And having that kind of vulnerability so that we can rebuild trust in the community. That's what's legitimate. Because police community legitimacy is about the community saying the police are legitimate and their practices are legitimate. So it just takes all of us, and the more that we can work together as a community, the more people that will be attracted to policing as well. So it can be a good career, some of the most interesting work out there, and one of the biggest ways you can make a positive impact in the community. I'm around a lot of police officers And I see a lot of folks dedicated to the profession, and at the heart of it is they want to help people. And I think, that's just a very strong way to have a calling in life. So if you're interested in LMPD and joining the team, I certainly would encourage you to do that. And Chief, if they want to do that, who do they contact?
Go to our website and it'll walk you right through it. It's it's great. And right now is a great time because there's hefty signing bonuses. And that's, thankfully for the art money, we've appropriated some there to try to recruit people, quite honestly.
Okay, thank you for that. Two other questions. I see one from Kalila Collins. Just want to, I'm a little confused on that question, but I know Kalila was part of the design team at some point in hand. So we just released our first study from the University of Louisville that went back to the community to gain additional guidance in our 911 diversion program. So Kalila, if you see us off base there in some way, please let us know. But certainly there has been community involvement with that. So if we need to amplify or enhance it, please let us know. And then just a last question on here. Let's see. Here's a question with two more. This one, Paul, I'm going to show to you. This is from Shonda. She said her mom is 68 years old. Her house was riddled with bullets. Why are there no government authorities and organizations that can help her? That's what OCEAN is designed for, the Office for Safe and Healthy Neighborhood. How can we help Shonda's mom?
Yeah, a couple of things. Unfortunately, these incidents happen too often where people's homes are shot up, for any number of reasons, and they feel in danger. So OCEAN we do have relocation programs, but they're temporary programs. That means that, we can assist by moving someone for a short period of time. Often we run into of moving people permanently is we're dealing with a lot of different levels of government and processes. So you're dealing with Section 8 housing where people are currently signed into leases, and it's about getting them out of the lease and being able to move them from one location to another. So it becomes a very difficult process. However, we do our best to work with people. We've moved a large number of people out of dangerous situations over the last year. So in this particular situation, if you need some assistance, by all means, give us a call here at Chandra, give us a call here at OCEAN at 502-574-1903 and ask to speak to one of our outreach coordinators regarding the situation, and we can be in touch with you.
Thank you, Paul. And just going back to one of the earlier questions, I think it was from Kiki about dropping charges against the protesters. Let me just clarify the number. 700 out of the roughly 1,000 charges have been dropped. And so those other 300 are under review by the county attorney's office. And then a last question, it's a little off topic. Tara Bassett says when she asked it, I want to thank Tara. She's one of our active streamers in the community. Why are our houseless friends about to be burned with fines for storage in the public right of way through a sleight of hand ordinance change coming through Metro Council? The 2017 ordinance was supposed to protect them. This exposes them. So Tara, I see this is a discussion topic that the council is going to have at one of their committee meetings here in the coming week or so. So, and I also saw Councilwoman George, who I guess is the sponsor of this resolution, responding that, this is what the process is about right now. Let's have that input. They're looking at changing the ordinance after 5 years of experience, ostensibly to make it better for the homeless community and the community at large. So I know you will be engaged with that, and I appreciate you being a good citizen. So let's make sure the council hears what everybody has to say about that particular suggested ordinance change. So with that, it's we're past the time we committed to, and the questions have stopped. So I just want to thank everybody. The purpose of this session was to update the community on more in depth with where we're at with multiple public safety initiatives and non-public safety initiatives. You can see over 150 different reforms have been taking place. They'll continue to take place with great vigor. And we want to just say, let's keep up the good work. We need you, the community, to help us get through these. When the Department of Justice releases their investigation report, just know that we will be hard at work on much of what's in the report, I'm sure. And what's not in the report, we'll get to work on and continue to cooperate with them. In the meantime, I want to thank everybody once again throughout these past couple of years, strengthening our city after the general tragedy of social justice in 2020 and our specific tragedy here in Louisville with Breonna Taylor. A time of great upset for our community. But we responded by coming together and working on many of these initiatives here, and we got a lot more to do. We're always going to have a lot more to do. But I don't know if it was Muhammad Ali who said it or somebody else, but it's, yeah, we're all going to get knocked down, but what do we do when we get back up? And so that's what we're in the process of doing so we can have a stronger, more compassionate, more equitable, and a safer city. So thank you, everybody joining us today. Chief, thank you for your major role in this program and everybody that helped put it together. Thanks all. Be safe.